Okay, Mr. Methvin, can you tell us where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
At the University of Tennessee, I guess.
Did you volunteer or were you drafted into the service?
I volunteered, really. It all ties into my college business. When I went to the University of Tennessee, my second year there, the war got going real big. The Army had training groups on most universities. I went to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And I joined the ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps, in the hopes that that would keep me out for a while and get me a job too when I had to go in. So spring of '43 that I joined the ROTC. I went on through another year of school, classes with the ROTC there on the university. And then it got serious enough over there in Germany that they put us all on active duty, actually. And I stayed with ROTC until time to go to Fort Benning for my officer training.
Okay. What military specialty were you when you went to training?
Just infantry.
Infantry. Okay. Can you describe your training and the conditions of your training at Fort Benning?
It was like being in college. We had classes every day, practically all day, with a lot of practical work, experiences out on the campus, well, not campus, but out in the fort, to emphasize what they had taught us in the classroom. And it was pretty rigorous stuff. We didn't have time to fool around. But it was valuable training.
Okay. What weapons did you qualify on when you were in training?
The rifles and machine guns, mortars.
Did you qualify as a marksman or a sharpshooter or an expert?
I don't know that I was given a title like expert or anything like that, but I got satisfactory ratings on all of them. I passed.
Okay. Can you describe some of the people that you trained with? Do you remember any of the folks you were with?
I was with a lot of my college acquaintances because it was the ROTC business at UT that got in, and they took us all in and kept us in the same grouping until we graduated from Officers Candidate School. And then I got my second lieutenant status.
So upon graduation, you became a second lieutenant?
Yeah.
Okay, and from there, where did you go?
I was assigned to the Company H, 310th Infantry Battalion of the 78th Infantry Division.
Okay. And from there, when did you deploy overseas?
Almost immediately. We had a week to go home and tell everybody goodbye, but then we reported to Camp Pickett, Virginia, and were assigned to our duties with the division that we'd been assigned to. I was assigned to the 2nd platoon. I had 4 heavy machine guns, 4 squads of people, and there was a heavy mortar platoon in the company, but it was a heavy weapons company, part of the 78th Division.
Okay. And what port did you embark from?
New York.
Can you describe your voyage and how long it took?
It took us about 10 days to go from New York to Great Britain. We didn't know where we were going. We zigzagged across the ocean. There was a group of ships went together, of course, but we took about 10 days to get to Great Britain.
Okay. And can you describe the conditions on board?
Crowded, very crowded. We had 2 meals a day. Well, that's all I know to say, really. There were no formal training exercises or anything like that while we were going overseas. We were just a boatload of people going over there to be reassigned when we got there.
Okay. Do you remember what port you arrived at in Great Britain?
At Plymouth Harbor, England, is where we landed.
Okay.
We disembarked and they sent us up the coast 15, 20, or 30 miles, I don't know, to get us out of the way until they could arrange for a shipment on over into France. And so maybe a month later, we came right back to where we had disembarked, and they put us on another ship and carried us across the water to France. Mm-hmm. Then from there, we just worked our way on up into battle zone.
Okay. England, did you have any additional training while you were waiting?
Not really. It was more getting equipped. They were trying to keep us up to date. Yeah, I'm sure there was some training, but not that severe.
Okay. Can you describe some of the equipment that you were issued and were required to carry?
Well, not there, because we knew we were just there until they could make room for us and provision for us to get on over on the continent. So we really didn't do any training to amount to anything there.
Okay.
In England.
When you were waiting, can you describe the food they were providing you?
It was just regular Army circumstances, no problems. You always complain, you know, but but no problems whatsoever there.
Okay. And so you were in the same unit you described when you deployed. You didn't change units while you were over there?
No.
Okay. What was your unit's mission when you received your first orders?
We got to Great Britain in September. But it took a month to get out of Great Britain and another month or longer to go from where we landed in France up across Belgium, all the way up to the north side of Germany. So it was December when I got to Germany. And we were set up then, well, we went right on to the front lines, to where all the commotion was, expecting the big drive all the time.
What year was this? December what year?
44.
December
44.
So you reached the front lines, and where were the front lines at that time?
Northern Germany.
Okay.
In Belgium. And every day or every opportunity they had, they just moved us that much closer to the front lines, to deploy us right into the middle of it. It was cold weather. Snow was about 10 inches deep on the ground. Temperature way below freezing. So most everything until we really got to the front lines was within buildings as much as they could. But then on December 9th, we moved up to the front lines carrying our guns and our ammunition and nothing extra. We were committed at that point to active duty. That's all I know to say to the battle that was going on. We were assigned an area to get ourselves established right up against there was a highway right in front of us that turned out to be used by the Germans as their approach route with all the equipment and the final push that they made. And we were put right up against that line, hopefully to that highway, hopefully to resist any activity that came along. Turned out we just got completely overpowered because we were so close to the line. Well, there wasn't any room to do anything. We were sitting ducks, waiting for something to happen. And we saw well, I don't know how to describe this, all the tanks and the heavy guns and the troops and everything else that Germany put into this last drive. And in that process, since we were just across the road from it or behind the fence from it, our battalion was all but wiped out. The company I was in, we got down to just 15 or 20 or maybe 30 men all told out of all that whole battalion that had got there just 2 or 3 days before.
Remember what time of day or night you first came under enemy fire?
We were in hearing distance of it 2 days before we actually got to seeing them all that much. But then, as I said, now we were just right behind a major highway here, and the first thing we knew about the second or third day we had been in position, here the Germans came with their big drive. The highway was filled, bumper to bumper, just going on. And they could see enough of us that they could fire into us and keep us down all the time. And as I said, our company, our battalion was all but wiped out before we ever really were committed to the front lines.
So how long were you under enemy fire?
Couple of days. There had been enough fighting all along in there that we could see dead soldiers laying on the ground, and so we were down to just a few people. After a second day in, we could tell it was all coming on us. And we couldn't get any contact with any superior officers or to find out really what we ought to do. And about night of the second or third day that I was there, that we were in position, my platoon had, I believe, 2 machine guns left. The mortar platoon was down to 1 or 2 mortar. And that night toward dark, with all the German infantry and tanks and everything else going by, we didn't know what to do, and we couldn't get in touch with battalion headquarters or anything. So I was elected to go find battalion headquarters and find out what we were supposed to be doing. And that was the last I saw of my platoon. I got to final headquarters in this little town that was right on the side of the road ran right through it. I got to the edge of that and found out where the battalion officers were and the office about dark. And everything broke loose, sure enough, from there on after that, until finally, with the German equipment, tanks and everything else going by us, all of a sudden, one of their tanks, they knew we were there. So one of the tankers drove his machine up we were in the basement of a building, but it was not underground. I mean, there was an opening on top of the ground, entrance to it. One of the German tankers drove up to that door and poked his gun in that door and told us to come out with our hands up or he'd blow us up. Well, we didn't want to be plumb crazy, so we talked about it a little while and put it off as long as we could, but we finally laid down our rifles and walked out the door. And there were enough Germans on the ground, infantrymen, that they started us moving back to the right, away from where they had come from. They moved us back from their beginning place. And I walked about 4 or 5 miles, I guess, but the night before was when my feet froze. and they were still frozen, and I was so cold I didn't know it. Anyway, we walked as far as we could go, and they finally loaded what all was left of our outfit into trucks and carried us 4 or 5 miles back to a little town and put us in a building and put us under guard. That's where we stayed until they could make other arrangements for us. Then as they could, they loaded us onto trucks and took us on away from there, and I can't tell you where we went exactly, but to get us out of the heavy troop movements and so forth, that area.
Besides your feet being frozen, were you wounded in any other way?
No.
Were you with your commanding officer at the time you were taken prisoner?
Yes, but that didn't last long. We got separated, and well, I couldn't go far with my feet like they were, but he was not wounded. And so the ones who were able to walk and get about on their own, they sent on. But I got parked at 4 or 5 miles back up the way into a headquarters building they had, and I stayed there overnight until they could send me to a hospital camp.
What was your impression of your commanding officer at the time? Did you admire him, or was there any?
I had no problems with anything like that.
Okay. And so, were you captured in Germany proper or in Belgium?
Germany.
Okay.
But it is way on up north of Belgium, but it's in Germany.
Okay. How old were you at the time of your capture?
Beats me.
About 21.
About 21, is that right? Okay.
I guess.
What were you thinking on the inside, your inner thoughts about when you were captured at that moment?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. Things were in such a hubbub, so much going on, we just kind of had to go with the flow. That's all I know to say.
Okay. And before your capture, in any of your training or instructions, did you have any training on what to do if you were captured?
One was keep our mouths shut, which we did try to do. Give them no information, well,
right.
Just none if we could work it that way.
Okay.
And that's what we tried to do.
At the time of your capture, what kind of treatment did the Germans give you?
Well, I don't know about the others who were hale and hearty, but I was handicapped, and I just was sort of pushed back out of the way until they could really get me out of the way. It was a hubbub of a place. They were directing activities for what was going on. So I was more or less ignored there for a little while, for several hours. And then was finally put on a truck and sent to another place where they could do something about my feet and tell me what was going on.
Okay. So did they provide you any medical treatment for your feet?
Not until the next day, and there wasn't a whole lot they could do, I reckon, except try to get them thawed.
Anything of your experience as a prisoner of war or anything like that?
Well, I'm sure they did, and they gave me a good examination and questioned me a lot. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but it was a pretty thorough wind-up, yeah.
Thinking back on the whole experience as a prisoner of war, what was the worst thing you can recall during that time?
I don't know. Well, the beginning of it, when we first got captured, we didn't know whether we were going to live more than another few minutes. You know, we were that was so uncertain at that point. But once we got started, walking across Germany, we weren't too bad worried, just so we didn't get bombed. We didn't have anything that we liked to eat, but we didn't starve. So now looking back, scared to death at the time, but now looking back, I made it pretty good.
And before your being taken prisoner, the worst time in your service, from training to combat, was, can you tell me what the worst thing you experienced during that time?
Going over, it was maybe it's rainy season over there all the time, I don't know, but I'm telling you the truth, the mud was about that deep everywhere we were. And we didn't have buildings to stay in most of the time. We just had to bed down out in the fields, mud or no mud. It was that way all the way up through Belgium. I did get to stay in the home of a Belgian family. Their name was Michael. Meals, they called it though, but we'd say Michael. A man and his wife and 4 or 5 children, small children. But anytime the weather was terrible, that was the worst thing about the whole business. Well, you couldn't stay out in it unless you got really active and without freezing.
Okay, so do you think your experiences in the war and a prisoner of war has changed you positively or negatively?
I have to say positively, as bad as all of that was, I saw the dark side of so many things, you know, but it made me happy and a feeling of blessing that I had what I had to come back to and what it's been ever since compared to that.
Carroll is an humble man in his heart. And the good thing about his experience is that he has never used it to propel himself into a more desirable or suitable situation. This came about in his career. Actually, he was always interested in the well-being of that man out yonder on the final line, building bicycles. And he has been a good citizen so far as having been in the Kiwanis Club, Service Club, for several years. It just made him a better contributor to the people in Lawrence County.
What do you attribute your survival to? How can you explain?
If the Lord hadn't been looking out for me, I'd have been 6 feet under a long time ago. And I mean that.
Well, this is said with humility, yes. I feel very strongly that God's purpose for Carroll's life was played out from the beginning of this experience.
So is there, have you received any medical treatment or things that were connected to your time as a POW or in the war?
My feet feel like they're about 20 degrees right now. They feel like they are cold. They're not. Put your hand on them and they're not, but they feel cold. My feet are cold all the time, from here down. I can't do anything about it. I'm taking medicine to try to keep blood flowing and so on, but that frozen feet over there is still with me.
So you've had that ever since?
I've had it ever since, and I can't do anything about it.
To wrap the interview up, is there anything else you'd like to add or elaborate on your experiences? What would you want to impart to the next generation, or is there anything else that you would want to add to your experiences?
He has no hatred for the German people. Actually, in all of this, he got a German immigrant for a brother-in-law. He's not a person who holds grudges.
So it takes all of us, and we need to be more tolerant of each other than we are noted for being, I think.
Hey, my name's Todd Breitman, and today is the 14th of January 2016, and we are in Leoma, Tennessee. And our interview now is with Maxine Methvin, the wife of Lieutenant Carroll Methvin, a former prisoner of war held by the Germans during World War II. Ms. Methvin, when were you born?
In 1926, July 5,
And where were you born?
right here in Lawrence County.
Okay. And what were you doing before the war?
Well, actually, I was getting my education. I graduated high school in 1943, and that was a time when everybody was in the armed forces, and I found employment immediately and retained that employment until the end of the war. And then I came back to Leoma.
Where were you when you heard Pearl Harbor?
Oh, Pearl Harbor doesn't stand out in my mind as much as the Japanese attack on this country. But in general, yes, I was right here at home going to school.
At the time, did you have any family members who were serving in the military?
No, the Bedingfields have never been military.
How did your family life change when the war happened?
Not appreciably, because my parents had been smart enough to have girls.
And how did the war affect students at your school?
We were so unsophisticated, and we were so separate from the flow of information that we have now. We got our news from a battery-operated radio, and so we just were not citizens of the world in my growing up days.
Do you have memories of rationing?
Not really. Yes, I know it occurred, I do. But we were rural people, and so we had so much more than city people had. My parents gardened, and grew cattle and pigs and country ham.
So you don't really have a recollection of having to ration anything because you had those on the farm?
Exactly.
Did you participate in any scrap drives, like scrap metal and rubber and things like that?
No, not really. That just wasn't Lawrence County focus at the time.
Do you remember any war bond rallies in town?
No.
Did you know anybody that went to work in a defense industry, in a factory or anything in town?
No, I didn't. I worked for the Reynolds Metals Company, and yes, they had some vague, insignificant contributions. Aluminum was their product, but it was not a focused military project.
And were you married at the time to Mr. Methvin, or did you meet him after the war, or did you know him when he was in the service?
Have we not been married all of our life?
Did you meet him after the war? Okay.
No, Todd. You might open up a keg of worms right there.
Okay. During the war, do you remember any special memories or celebrating holidays during the war? Was there anything different, or did you feel like they were the same during the war?
Well, actually, we were quite buffered from the effects of the war. Being country, being self-sufficient, and having what we needed here on our property. My parents had a farm, and we were never short of anything.
Okay. Do you have any memories of D-Day or the Victory in Europe Day?
That is quite vague, Todd. Yes. The significant thing about Victory Day is that President Roosevelt died so soon after that. But he was a good president for the wartime that we went through.
Do you remember how you felt when you heard that the war was over?
Oh, ecstatic, really, ecstatic.
And how would you describe the effects of the war on the rest of your life?
Well, the first significant thing, Todd, was that I was reduced in force by my employer, and I came home to find work in Lawrenceburg. Carroll had his R&R. He went back and got his degree at UT, and he had done some local work in teaching veterans in the field of agriculture. And he and his brother Max were going to be the biggest farmers that Lawrence County ever produced.
That didn't last long.
And so I'm getting personal now. We both we're products of Leoma Baptist Church. So we both resumed our attendance at church. I could not go because of a bus schedule. I didn't have a car to ride down to Reynolds to go to work. And we went back to church, in the spring of 1947. He from the east and me from home. And so, after the morning service, one Sunday out in the spring, Leoma Baptist Church was worshiping in a borrowed building because they were building this extension to the existing building. And so I and some of my friends came tripping down the steps after the morning service, just having the gayest time. And Carroll was standing down on a lower level with some of his friends. And he didn't recognize me. He had to ask somebody my name and my parents' name. And his summation of that experience was that he just got his socks knocked off. And this has led to a courtship and a wonderful 66 years together. We have a daughter, we have a son, we have 3 granddaughters, 2 grandsons, and we have a great-granddaughter and we have a great-grandson. And we're just going to carry on like this for the next 100 years. It's working really well. Oh.
Well, I'm going to ask you one last time here before we wrap it up. What lessons for today's generation would you like to pass on with your experiences?
The value of family, the value of community, the value of participation in what is going on in your church, or even if it's recycling newspaper. Lawrence County even gets awards for the amount of recycling material that we keep out of the landfill. That's kind of neat. So we just apply the same rules of common sense. We've never been splashy. We've never, well, let me say that we did go back to Germany and we revisited some places.
Several of the places where I've talked about, where I was.
Because of the German brother-in-law. He and his wife just casually suggested at the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, they were going back to visit his family in Germany, and they said, "Why don't you all go with us?" And we did, and it was just a wonderful confirmation for me that the world was not going to go to pot, because we had lived through World War II and all of its destruction and all that was required to put it back together again, and that included families as well as material possessions. It was good for us to stand in Dusseldorf with this German brother-in-law, and I'm still amazed that America would receive immigrants from Germany after the war. But we were standing there, and the brother-in-law said, "Carroll, after World War I, the government confiscated the property of my grandparents. After World War II, they confiscated the property of my parents." And I said to myself, "They will not confiscate my property. I'll go to America." And that's been a rewarding experience, to have the viewpoint of a German young man during this time. And he, later we learned while we were in Germany, that he and his brother the Germans had a policy that if there were family members in the countryside, please send your children to the safety of the countryside. And he said that he and his brother were standing on a street corner in Hammelburg when Patton's advance forces came through, going up the hill to the camp to liberate the American prisoners. That's kind of a small world right there. But that German brother-in-law still has a heavy accent. He is the one who lost Carol's sister recently.
Well, is there anything I forgot to ask you about your life during the war or after the war that you'd like to add?
No, I don't think of anything. We were aware, yes, for instance, that Reynolds Aluminum Company was producing some things, but so far as munitions and that sort of thing, we were never close to any of that production. So, you know, the home front carry on in its normal fashion as possible. But again, in that my parents chose to have daughters, we were not involved in soldering.
Well, thank you very much for both of your times with us here. And I think it's very valuable to capture this for the future generations, for my kids and their kids. It has a lot of value, more than I think we'll all understand.